August 23, 1944. Normandy, France. Forward American armored position. The hedgerows trembled under the pounding of distant artillery, sending shards of earth and debris into the tense air. U.S. Sherman tanks advanced cautiously, their tracks crunching over churned soil, each movement scrutinized by infantry pressing close for cover. Smoke curled from scorched fields, mingling with the metallic tang of gunfire and oil. Somewhere overhead, the faint hum of German reconnaissance aircraft warned of unseen eyes in the sky. Inside one Sherman, the crew exchanged wary glances. On the turret, a seemingly trivial addition, a single, thin wire dangling from the hull, fluttered in the breeze. Skeptical eyes followed it, mocking the pointless device, whispering about wasted effort and unnecessary tinkering. Yet Sergeant Whitman, the engineer who had installed it, observed silently from the forward position. Every shadow, every glint on the enemy's optical equipment, every subtle movement in the tree-line had been anticipated. What appeared meaningless to the soldiers might just turn the tide. This wire, invisible in its ingenuity, had the power to make the American tanks vanish from German sight. The first test of audacity was about to begin. Normandy, August 1944. The hedgerows of northern France were a labyrinth of green walls, twisting earthworks, and shattered farmland. 4 U.S. armored units, each advance was a perilous gamble. German forces, well-versed in defensive tactics, relied on forward spotters, concealed positions, and precise artillery to exploit even the smallest visibility advantage. Every tank movement, every shadow, every glint of metal risked instant detection and destruction. The American push, weeks after the initial D-Day landings, demanded coordination between infantry and armored units. Sherman tanks, while powerful, were conspicuous. Their size, movement, and reflective surfaces made them easy targets for enemy observers. Reconnaissance aircraft hovered above, scanning the terrain, while German spotters used optical devices to direct devastating artillery fire. Entire columns of tanks had already been disabled in similar engagements, underscoring the deadly vulnerability of exposed armor. Within this high-stakes environment, the U.S. Army's Engineering Corps was tasked with innovations to protect men and machines. Camouflage nets, painted hulls, and improvised concealment methods had been tested with mixed results. Crews adapted cautiously, but nothing had yet offered a decisive advantage against trained German observation. Every failure carried consequences: a destroyed tank, a lost supply convoy, or a stalled offensive. Sergeant Whitman, an engineer with meticulous attention to detail, observed these vulnerabilities firsthand. He noticed patterns in German detection, reflections from metal surfaces, shadows cast by tank turrets, and slight but telltale movements across the hedgerows. Whitman theorized that a subtle intervention, seemingly insignificant to an untrained eye, could disrupt the enemy's optical tracking. Enter the pointless wire. Suspended from the hull of a Sherman, it appeared trivial, almost laughable. Crews initially dismissed it, mocking the effort as a waste of time. Yet Whitman had calculated its potential impact. By manipulating how light interacted with the tank's surfaces and breaking up recognizable outlines, the wire could effectively conceal movement from German spotters. In essence, a small, unassuming device had the potential to redefine tactical advantage in the hedgerow battles of Normandy. The first field trials were tense. Tanks equipped with the wire moved in formation alongside unmodified units. Observers recorded enemy responses, noting detection patterns and artillery accuracy. The initial results were subtle but promising. Tanks with the wire were less frequently identified, their positions harder to target, and enemy fire demonstrated delayed reaction times. Whitman's innovation, once derided, was quietly proving its worth. Every engagement tested both human courage and technical ingenuity. Infantrymen watched tanks advance under fire, unsure which would draw enemy attention. Crews adjusted to new routines, trusting a device they could barely understand. German spotters, unaware of the innovation, continued their surveillance, unaware that the simple wire was distorting perception and providing a critical edge. By the end of the first day, the potential of Whitman's invention was undeniable. The small addition to Sherman tanks had altered detection patterns, reduced enemy fire accuracy, and introduced a tactical advantage that conventional camouflage and protocol could not achieve. The battlefield, chaotic and deadly, now contained a quiet but profound shift. One engineer's ingenuity was beginning to render American armor almost invisible to the enemy. The next morning, the hedgerows of Normandy were alive with tension. German spotters perched behind shattered walls and twisted trees, binoculars trained on every movement. Artillery crews adjusted angles based on fleeting glimmers of metal, shadows cast on the earth, and the faint hum of tank engines. For American armored units, each advance was a trial of patience, skill, and courage. Every misstep could invite devastation. Sergeant Whitman had refined his theory overnight. He adjusted the wire's length, angle, and suspension points, meticulously testing how sunlight, cloud cover, and tank movement influenced detection. The modifications were almost imperceptible, yet each adjustment had measurable effects on the tank's visibility. Engineers recorded angles, light refraction, and line-of-sight scenarios, mapping how the wire interacted with terrain, shadows, and enemy observation points. Tank crews, initially skeptical, had begun to notice differences. Movement that once drew immediate fire now went unchallenged. Shadows fell differently, reflections dissipated across uneven ground. The wire, seemingly insignificant, had started to perform as Whitman had predicted. Confidence grew among the crews, not reckless, but cautious and calculated. Soldiers whispered about the invisible advantage, while enemy observers failed to explain why some tanks appeared to vanish. Meanwhile, German commanders began noting inconsistencies in reports. Artillery targeting seemed erratic. Strikes missed armored formations that should have been plainly visible. Reconnaissance pilots filed complaints. Tanks had moved along predictable routes, yet strikes yielded minimal damage. Confusion spread through their ranks, a subtle but critical shift in battlefield psychology. The Americans had achieved the rarest of tactical advantages. The enemy was uncertain, hesitant, and reactive. The innovation's simplicity belied its effectiveness. Unlike complex electronic devices or heavy camouflage, the wire required no specialized equipment or additional manpower. It relied solely on observation, understanding of optics, and careful experimentation. Whitman's disciplined approach transformed a trivial addition into a tool capable of altering battlefield dynamics. By the third day of testing, the results were undeniable. Tank formations equipped with the wire moved through contested fields with reduced enemy detection. Artillery fire was delayed or misdirected. Infantry reported safer advances under armored cover. Engineers meticulously documented the success, noting that a device mocked as pointless had reduced visibility to enemy eyes in ways previously thought impossible. The broader operational context amplified the impact. Allied forces were pushing inland, relying heavily on armored support to maintain momentum against entrenched German defenses. Every tank preserved, every misdirected artillery shell, and every successful advance contributed to the overall campaign. Whitman's wire, small and unassuming, had become an unseen shield, a tactical multiplier quietly shaping the outcome of engagements across Normandy. By the time the wire-equipped tanks faced their first fully contested advance, the stage was set. Crews moved with a mixture of skepticism and cautious trust. Infantry followed in synchronized coordination, and German spotters, unaware of the innovation, were about to face a battlefield-altering surprise. The first engagement would prove that audacity, ingenuity, and disciplined observation could make the seemingly invisible decisive. The morning of the first full engagement arrived with a tense stillness. Tank crews climbed into their Shermans, inspecting every hatch, turret, and, most importantly, the subtle wire dangling from the hull. Skepticism lingered in the air. Some muttered about wasted effort, others about superstition. Yet Sergeant Whitman moved among them with quiet confidence, adjusting angles, reminding drivers to maintain consistent speed, and observing how light caught the wire in subtle, calculated ways. From the German lines, eyes scanned the fields and hedgerows, searching for familiar silhouettes. Spotters' binoculars traced every ridge, every mound of dirt, every shadow. But something had changed. Tanks seemed to blend into the undulating terrain, shapes fragmented, reflections diminished. Observers found themselves straining, recalculating, and adjusting in vain. The wire, trivial in appearance, disrupted visual perception and broke the familiar outline of the American armor. Within the Sherman, crews noted immediate differences. A sudden absence of incoming fire, a lack of tracking shadows, and delayed artillery response created an eerie sense of protection. Engineers on the flanks documented every reaction, mapping how the wire's placement affected enemy accuracy. What had been theoretical became tangible. A small, deliberate intervention altered the perception of the battlefield. Confidence built quietly but profoundly. Crews moved with precision, adjusting to terrain, coordinating with infantry, and advancing under conditions that previously would have demanded extreme caution. The psychological effect was as powerful as the physical. Soldiers who had approached each hedgerow with anxiety now advanced with focused determination, trusting in the invisible shield provided by ingenuity and meticulous planning. Enemy reconnaissance faltered. Observers reported inconsistent visibility and delayed spotting. Reports reached artillery units too late, creating hesitation in firing solutions. Each misstep compounded the effect. Tanks remained unscathed, advancing farther than anticipated, while German commanders struggled to interpret the anomaly. Whitman's subtle innovation had rewritten assumptions, forcing the enemy into reactive behavior rather than proactive engagement. The wire's effectiveness depended on human skill as much as physics. Drivers maintained steady speeds, turrets moved in controlled arcs, and crews coordinated movements to prevent revealing outlines. Whitman's instructions were simple but exacting. A tilt here, a minor adjustment there, and the illusion of invisibility held. Precision, discipline, and observation became as vital as firepower itself. Even minor environmental shifts, sunlight angles, cloud cover, or swaying hedgerows, could compromise detection if ignored. Crews learned to adjust instinctively, blending intuition with procedure. The synergy between human skill and the simple wire was now clear. Technology and observation alone could not achieve this effect. It required attentiveness, experience, and trust in both the innovation and the individual applying it. By mid-morning, the results were undeniable. German fire was sporadic and ineffective. Tanks moved in formation, infantry advanced under cover, and engineers logged success with meticulous notes. What had started as mockery became quiet respect. One small addition, a wire seemingly pointless, had altered perception, timing, and battlefield dynamics. Across the hedgerows, German spotters struggled to reconcile experience with observation. Confidence gave way to uncertainty, hesitation replaced aggression, and a subtle but decisive advantage shifted to the Americans. In the span of a single engagement, one engineer's innovation had demonstrated a principle that would ripple across armored tactics. Careful ingenuity, combined with disciplined application, could achieve results that brute force or numbers could not. As the day progressed, the wire's effect became increasingly pronounced. Engineers observed how it subtly disrupted the enemy's optical instruments. Shadows that had once outlined turrets now fractured across the terrain, reflections dissipated into surrounding foliage, and the familiar silhouette of the Sherman seemed to dissolve into the hedgerows. German spotters, relying on years of training, found themselves second-guessing what they saw, uncertain whether the shapes in the fields were actual tanks or optical illusions. The technological simplicity of the wire contrasted sharply with its tactical significance. Unlike electronic devices or heavy camouflage systems, it required no maintenance, no additional crew, and no complex setup. Its genius lay in exploiting the enemy's reliance on observation and perception. By creating a subtle distortion of light and form, the wire rendered American armor unpredictable and invisible, transforming a minor, overlooked addition into a powerful force multiplier. The American crews quickly adapted to this innovation. Drivers moved with precise coordination, turret operators adjusted with calculated timing, and infantry followed synchronized paths. Each minor adjustment amplified the effect, ensuring that tanks remained concealed even when advancing through open fields. The operation relied on human vigilance as much as the wire itself, demonstrating that even the simplest tools could produce extraordinary results when applied with discipline. German responses were immediate but ineffective. Spotters attempted to compensate by shifting positions, relying more heavily on aerial reconnaissance, and adjusting artillery calculations. Yet each adaptation came too late. The invisible tanks disrupted expected patterns of engagement, frustrating both field commanders and higher echelon strategists. The confusion spread through German lines. Attacks were mistimed, strikes fell short, and confidence faltered. The strategic implications became clear to American command. With tanks moving undetected, supply lines advanced more safely, infantry faced less risk, and forward positions could be held with reduced casualties. The small wire had created an operational advantage disproportionate to its size, altering not just a single engagement but the broader tactical environment. Whitman observed from the forward position, notebook in hand, recording details for replication across other armored units. Each success confirmed that ingenuity, precision, and timing could surpass conventional limitations. The seemingly pointless wire had redefined engagement possibilities, providing a practical demonstration that subtle innovations could influence the battlefield as decisively as firepower. By the end of the day, the psychological impact on both sides was evident. American crews moved with quiet confidence, empowered by the advantage, while German forces grew cautious and reactive, uncertain of where unseen tanks might appear. In the chaos of Normandy, amid hedgerows and shattered farmland, a single wire had become a symbol of ingenuity, a tactical equalizer, and a decisive force multiplier. The morning fog clung to the hedgerows, muting color and sound. Sherman tanks rumbled forward, their engines muffled by the thick earth, tracks tearing through churned soil with methodical precision. Infantry followed, crouched and wary, scanning for signs of German positions. Every movement was calculated, every decision carried the weight of potential disaster. On the turret of one Sherman, the wire danced subtly, catching light only at the slightest angle. Crew members exchanged anxious glances, recalling the weeks of skepticism and derision. Yet as they advanced into the open field, something remarkable occurred. Enemy fire that had once peppered advancing tanks now fell short, misaligned, or came too late. Shadows and reflections that had revealed armor to the enemy seemed fractured, distorted, or entirely absent. Sergeant Whitman observed from a forward outpost, notebook in hand, recording angles, light behavior, and enemy response. His theory was now manifesting in real time. Tanks moved like ghosts across the battlefield, their presence uncertain even to trained German spotters. The invisible advantage granted confidence but demanded vigilance. One misstep could reveal the illusion, undoing weeks of meticulous preparation. The first artillery salvo arrived, shells screaming overhead with lethal intent. The tanks seemed to vanish just as observers had predicted, the wire breaking optical cues and masking movement. German spotters scrambled, adjusting calculations, but each delay compounded the effect. Crew members whispered, tension balanced by the quiet exhilaration of success. As the engagement intensified, multiple Sherman formations converged on a contested crossroads. The wire continued to perform flawlessly, hiding hulls behind broken terrain, blending movement with shadows, and masking even subtle engine vibrations. Infantry advanced under armored cover, their progress faster and safer than ever before. The battlefield seemed momentarily suspended, frozen between potential catastrophe and calculated advantage. German commanders, watching from observation posts and aerial reconnaissance, grew increasingly frustrated. Reports of tanks disappearing or evading sight circulated quickly. Adjustments were made, artillery angles changed, reconnaissance flights increased, but the advantage remained with the Americans. The wire, trivial in appearance, had created a tactical paradox, a visible threat that could not be accurately located. Within each Sherman, crews adapted seamlessly. Drivers maintained steady lines, turret operators coordinated arcs of fire, and gunners adjusted for terrain, all while trusting the subtle device that had once been ridiculed. The invisible armor granted initiative, allowing units to dictate engagement timing and positioning rather than react to enemy fire. By mid-morning, the battlefield dynamic had irrevocably shifted. German firepower, which had once dictated movement, now lagged behind, misaligned, and increasingly ineffective. The wire-equipped tanks pressed forward, maintaining formation, covering infantry, and seizing key positions. One small innovation, a simple wire, had transformed the rules of engagement, granting U.S. forces control in a space where conventional tactics had failed. The first hour of the operation concluded with minimal casualties, maximum territorial gain, and a profound realization: the battlefield had been altered not by brute force, but by ingenuity, observation, and audacious application of a subtle yet revolutionary device. The sun rose higher, cutting through the lingering mist, illuminating the patchwork of hedgerows and shattered fields. Sherman tanks moved in disciplined formation, each hull an extension of calculated ingenuity. The wire dangled subtly, nearly invisible, yet performing its critical role, distorting outlines, breaking shadows, and fragmenting reflections. German spotters, trained and vigilant, struggled to reconcile experience with what they observed. Artillery fire rained down sporadically, but shells fell short or veered harmlessly aside. Crew members inside the tanks felt the difference instantly, the deadly precision of previous engagements replaced by cautious, hesitant enemy fire. Infantry units advanced in parallel, taking advantage of the rare, fleeting invisibility granted by the unassuming wire. Every step, every maneuver, reinforced the sense that the battlefield had quietly shifted in favor of the Americans. From forward positions, engineers documented reactions meticulously. Whitman observed enemy miscalculations with satisfaction, noting how even minimal deviations in targeting revealed the effectiveness of his creation. German commanders struggled to adjust, attempting to reposition spotters and recalibrate artillery. Yet every modification arrived too late. The Americans had already seized the initiative. The breakthrough came at a strategic crossroads. Tanks emerged from hedgerows, seemingly appearing from nowhere. German spotters failed to detect the advance until shells were already being misdirected. Infantry followed closely behind, advancing under near-complete concealment. The combination of discipline, innovation, and timing created an operational advantage of unprecedented clarity. Psychologically, the engagement fractured German confidence. Spotters hesitated, questioning visual cues. Commanders issued cautious orders, wary of invisible threats that could strike at any moment. The Americans, meanwhile, capitalized on this hesitation. Movement was deliberate, coordinated, and unstoppable. One engineer's ingenuity had become a force multiplier, turning seemingly minor adjustments into a decisive tactical advantage. By late morning, the entire armored unit had moved several kilometers, occupying key positions and securing vital supply routes. Losses were minimal. Enemy fire, misdirected and delayed, had achieved little. Crews, once skeptical of the wire, now regarded it with reverent acknowledgement. The unassuming device had redefined their perception of possibility, showing that innovation, even in its simplest form, could dictate the rhythm of battle. Observers would later note that the engagement altered operational doctrine. The invisible advantage granted by the wire enabled commanders to consider maneuvers previously deemed too risky. The event demonstrated the fusion of human skill, tactical planning, and subtle technological intervention, a combination capable of redefining engagement outcomes on the battlefield. As the smoke cleared and the hedgerows settled into quiet tension, the truth was evident. The American forces, guided by one engineer's vision and the disciplined execution of his crews, had seized control of the battlefield. The pointless wire, once mocked, had transformed into a symbol of tactical mastery, demonstrating that ingenuity could outweigh numbers, firepower, and expectation in the harsh calculus of war. The hedgerows, once alive with tension and gunfire, now lay in an uneasy calm. Sherman tanks rested in formation, their tracks cutting shallow furrows into churned soil. Infantry moved among them, surveying the battlefield, and soldiers whispered in subdued awe. 12 hours ago, skepticism had filled their voices. Now, silent respect replaced doubt. One thin wire, dismissed as trivial, had made the difference between exposure and near invisibility, between vulnerability and tactical dominance. Reports arrived at the armored command posts. Observers detailed the altered patterns of German targeting, noting delayed artillery response, misaligned fire, and hesitations in reconnaissance reporting. Analysts cross-referenced logs from multiple units and positions. The data confirmed what crews had already sensed in the field. The wire was not a gimmick, it was a revolutionary enhancement to operational capability. Crew members gathered in hushed conversations, sharing accounts of the engagement. A gunner recalled shells falling harmlessly beside his tank, another described the eerie sensation of advancing through enemy lines without attracting fire. Confidence, measured and quiet, grew with each story. Discipline and skill, magnified by the wire, had transformed fear into calculated assurance. From forward observation points, Sergeant Whitman documented every nuance. Shadows fractured differently, reflections scattered unpredictably, and enemy fire arrived late or imprecise. Every detail validated months of theory, field testing, and subtle adjustments. The wire had achieved what netting, paint, and camouflage could not: a near-total disruption of enemy visual tracking. German reconnaissance and artillery were forced into uncertainty. Spotters misreported positions, gunners recalibrated with increasing hesitation, and formations faltered. The psychological impact was immediate. Hesitation replaced aggression, and caution replaced confidence. Commanders who once relied on predictable outcomes now confronted the reality of unseen adversaries manipulating perception itself. The operational advantage extended beyond the battlefield. Supply convoys moved with greater security, infantry maneuvers proceeded with reduced casualties, and armored units gained flexibility previously unattainable. One engineer's ingenuity had created a tactical multiplier, altering not just a single engagement but the operational environment of an entire sector. Even small environmental shifts, sunlight, shadow, and terrain, highlighted the wire's effectiveness. Where previously a reflection or outline would reveal a tank's position, now the interplay of angles, movement, and careful placement rendered detection unreliable. Whitman's design proved that subtle adjustments, executed with precision, could achieve results disproportionate to their scale. By nightfall, the significance of the day was apparent to American command. The wire had not merely protected tanks, it had shifted the dynamics of engagement. German forces hesitated, uncertainty spreading through lines that had once been disciplined and efficient. Meanwhile, American crews, empowered by success and meticulous preparation, had gained an edge that would influence subsequent operations across Normandy. The battlefield, scarred and quiet, bore the invisible mark of innovation. A small wire, initially mocked, had reshaped tactics, altered perception, and demonstrated the power of human ingenuity applied with disciplined observation. The lessons were clear. Even the simplest invention, executed with precision, could transform the calculus of war. The morning after the engagement, Reports from multiple units confirmed the scale of the achievement. Tanks equipped with Whitman's wire had advanced farther, faster, and with fewer casualties than any comparable units in the sector. Artillery targeting data showed repeated errors, shells landing behind hedgerows, spotting reports delayed or inaccurate, and German formations hesitant to commit fully. Across the battlefield, the tactical advantage was unmistakable. American command quickly recognized the broader operational potential. The wire was no longer a novelty, it became a standard consideration for forward armored units. Orders were issued to replicate the configuration across additional Sherman tanks, ensuring that other crews could benefit from the same near invisibility. The morale boost among crews was palpable. Fear had been replaced with quiet confidence, and every maneuver now carried the potential for decisive impact. German forces attempted rapid adaptation. Spotters repositioned, observation posts were reinforced, and aerial reconnaissance increased. Yet each response lagged behind reality. The subtle disruption caused by a single wire could not be fully countered without fundamental changes to detection methodology, and by the time adjustments were implemented, American forces had already secured critical positions and supply routes. Hesitation and uncertainty had crept into enemy planning, reducing operational effectiveness across the sector. The strategic implications extended beyond a single engagement. With concealed armored units, American commanders could plan advances previously considered too risky. Infantry operations moved more freely, supply lines were secured, and the psychological edge shifted decisively to the Allies. The wire had demonstrated that innovation at the smallest scale could reshape both tactical and operational decision-making. Reports circulated praising Whitman's ingenuity. Engineers, field officers, and tank crews documented the wire's effect meticulously, noting angles, terrain, and timing that maximized concealment. Observers remarked that the combination of human skill, disciplined application, and subtle technology had produced outcomes far exceeding traditional expectations. Where brute force had failed to grant advantage, precision and observation now dictated success. The broader lesson became clear: war is not solely won by firepower, numbers, or brute force. Observation, adaptation, and ingenuity can achieve results that technology alone cannot replicate. The wire, trivial in appearance but profound in effect, embodied this principle. German forces were confronted not by overwhelming fire, but by uncertainty and disruption, an invisible force that reshaped their perception of the battlefield. By nightfall, the operational landscape had changed. Tanks moved more securely, infantry operated with improved confidence, and engineers prepared to expand the innovation to other units. The invisible advantage granted by Whitman's wire was no longer experimental, it had become a critical component of armored warfare. The battlefield bore a silent testament. Even the smallest interventions, when applied with intelligence and precision, could tilt the balance of conflict and leave an indelible mark on history. In the quiet that settled over Normandy, the landscape appeared deceptively serene. Hedgerows, scarred fields, and abandoned German posts bore silent testimony to the battle that had unfolded. Sherman tanks rested, crews patrolled, and the air carried the faint smell of burnt fuel and earth, yet the most remarkable transformation was invisible. The battlefield had been altered by one engineer's ingenuity. Sergeant Whitman's wire, once derided as pointless, had demonstrated the profound impact of subtle innovation. By disrupting observation, masking movement, and fracturing perception, a simple device had preserved lives, secured key positions, and shifted operational momentum. The advantage was not measured solely in destroyed enemy positions but in the confidence, safety, and initiative gained by the Americans. The engagement revealed a broader truth. Human skill and ingenuity could redefine the rules of warfare. Technology alone, cameras, binoculars, artillery, could not overcome creativity, precision, and disciplined observation. Whitman's meticulous attention to detail, combined with the courage and adaptability of tank crews, transformed a small intervention into a decisive factor, illustrating that even in the most brutal and mechanized conflicts, human intellect remained a force multiplier. German forces, confronted with uncertainty, hesitation, and the invisible disruption of their strategies, were forced to adapt in ways that highlighted the psychological dimension of combat. The invisible advantage underscored the strategic importance of perception, timing, and initiative, demonstrating that control over information and visibility could shape the outcome of engagements as effectively as firepower. In the end, the story of the pointless wire stands as a reminder that innovation often resides in simplicity. One engineer, armed with observation, calculation, and audacity, had reshaped armored warfare in Normandy. The quiet heroism of ingenuity, combined with disciplined execution, left an enduring legacy, a demonstration that even the smallest ideas, when applied with precision, could change the course of battles and redefine what was possible on the field of war. The hedgerows were calm, the tanks were still, but the lessons endured, proof that vision, skill, and subtle innovation could render the unseen decisive and forever alter the calculus of combat.